And I have to say that it's only for Jorge that I would actually do this kind of endurance on a Saturday in August, and it has been absolutely delightful. So I want to start by recognizing that I'm a guest on Turtle Island, and that the research and conceptual art and teaching that I do is conducted on the lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And my work is, yeah, perfect. I'll just tell you when to switch.
Okay.
So my work is very much indebted to anti-racism and anti-colonial and queer feminist praxis. So you can go to the next slide. So in taking up the question, what happens at the intersection of conceptual art and teaching, I want to turn our attention to the intersection or the conjunctive. So the conjunctive, and I use these terms interchangeably with the conjunctive. So witness, collaboration, reciprocity, relationality, and an ethics of care. And these conditions of the conjunctive, or what I call feltness, are deeply embedded and entwined in my doings of art, research, and pedagogy, or more specifically, the practice of research creation. So this feltness shifts research and pedagogy to become a practice of intimacy. And I've unpacked feltness and intimacy at great length in previous publications, drawing on feminist theories of touch and relationality, and the practice of hand felting, affect theory, and queer theory. And likewise, I've published extensively myself, as well as with my collaborator, Sarah Truman, I've published on the practice and value of research creation. So provoked in part by Jorge's question and our current moment and the crisis of isolation, in this short paper, I want to focus on and explore the conjunctive, or what I call feltness. The conjunctive, Owen Chapman writes, invites the juxtaposition of other terms, concepts, and categories. Erin Manning and Brian Masumi consider the conjunctive as crucial in formulating an understanding and practice of research creation. The conjunctive, they write, is a mutual interpenetration of processes rather than a communication of products. So research creation, taken as a conjunctive whole, becomes a thinking in action and a practice in its own right, as opposed to the combination of distinct disciplines where each discipline remains intact. So for Manning and Masumi, research creation is experimental and catalyzes emergent events. Similarly, the proposition with is used to indicate associations and connections between entities. However, as Sarah Truman and I have articulated at great length, with is more than merely additive, so it's not a plus sign. It is an ethico-political intention brought to bear on research creation. As such, with is a milieu, an active set of relations that are composed of dimensions and vibrations that materialize a moment of space-time. If research creation is composed in the conjunctive of responsible relations as a practice of intimacy, then we can ask what grows and emerges within such a place. Returning to the conditions of the conjunctive, its feltness, relationality, reciprocity, and an ethics of care demands that then we ask complex questions about what it means to be in relation. And I think this is what just links up really nicely with the last presentation we heard. To conjoin or to collaborate. So we have to ask, how are relations composed and sustained over time? How are all bodies in relation being accounted for, attuned to, and offered something for their contribution or their labor of being in relation? Jennifer Nash's scholarship on Black feminisms and intersectionality might be of help here. Writing about the ways that intersectionality has become emptied of its reference to Black feminist thought, intersectionality, Nash contends, has been used to incite an inclusive feminism, but in doing so, it has become both overdetermined and emptied of any specific meaning. Sarah Truman elaborates on something similar in her bibliographic entry on feminist new materialisms, And she writes, and I quote, "The relationship scholars build with concepts and research that they cite is part of a feminist praxis. In other words, it is not feminist new materialism to read a piece of data diffractively unless one also takes into account the diffractive production of intersectional politics. Thus, simply stating that things are composed in relation doesn't get at the heart of a research creation practice attuned to feminist ethics and politics. So therefore, I remind you, the conjunctive, it's not additive, it's not a plus sign, and it's not about performance of inclusion. Rather, this is about radical relationality that is consensual, nurturing, intimate, and it foregrounds reciprocity, kinship, and care. And we heard earlier today around feminist ethics of care. And as a relational practice, then the conjunctive between art and pedagogy, or art, research, and pedagogy, becomes collective work in undoing white supremacy. With this in mind, the conjunctive becomes a space to do feminist, queer, anti-racist, anti-ableist, and anti-colonial work. So we heard earlier in hour one from Ellen on the amazing presentation about walking. So I'm going to start with some of the walking work that I've been doing to exemplify this kind of conjunctive. So at Walking Lab, which I co-direct with Sarah Truman, we've been thinking about troubling the normative ways that walking is approached through oblique contours. This means that the place where walking events take place and the concepts activated on the walk need to materialize oblique relations. For example, one of the ways we approach this is through what we call a queer walking tour. So while conventional walking tours can reinforce dominant histories, memories, power relations, and normative or fixed understandings of place, and this place-based knowledge can serve various forms of governance or ideology and maintain the status quo, including ongoing violence of settler colonialism and the erasure of racialized, gendered, and disabled bodies. So queer walking tours are situated, as in they happen in a specific location and attend to that location, but simultaneously are out of place, meaning that they defamiliarize how diverse publics attune to place and concepts. So for example, the Bank, the Mine, the Colony, the Crime was a queer walking tour in Toronto's financial district that included lectures and performances on Canada's legal, financial, and genocidal implicatedness in extractive economies. So the walking tour exposed the radicalization or the racialization of geology and its implications in ongoing slavery and genocide. Moving on from Walking Lab, in my ongoing research creation project, The Pedagogical Impulse, the commitment to radical relationality materializes in one of the projects called the Instant Class Kit, which is a mobile curriculum guide and socially engaged artwork that contains work by 14 contemporary artists. The Instant Class Kit, produced as an edition of 4, brings together contemporary curriculum materials in the form of artist multiples, such as zines, scores, games, newspapers, and other sensory objects from a diverse group of artist educators across North America. The lessons, syllabi, and classroom activities produced by this new generation of artists address topics and methodologies including queer subjectivities and Indigenous epistemologies, social movements and collective protest, immigration, technology, and ecology. The kits circulate to post-secondary classrooms where they are handled, touched, and cared for. So they've been circulating for the last year and a half. And right now, because of COVID, we're currently developing online curricular material for use of the kits during COVID, because we can no longer circulate them via mail. And some of the kit contents include, so Anthea Black's Keep Queering the Syllabus is a 16-page zine that contains biographies and information on queer and trans artists. The Celebrate People's History posters are rooted in the DIY tradition of mass production political propaganda, and they bring moments of the history of social justice struggles to life, such as the fight for LGBTQ rights, Black liberation and labor reform. The People's Kitchen Collective, Kitchen Remedies, invites participants to bring the stories, traditions, and wisdom of our elders and ancestors into the kitchen, and small pouches with food ingredients ask activators to smell and put their noses and memories to work. The collective seeks remedies from everything from upset stomachs to the patriarchy, because we know that these are in fact connected. And ingredients hold stories of our resilience. Black trans activist Cyrus Ware's project, Activist Love Letters, is also included in the kit, and it's similarly committed to an ethics of care. It asks participants to think about their role in sustaining a movement and supporting their communities. And lastly, Indigenous artist Tanya Willard's Bush Manifesto is etched into a piece of living birch bark, and it asks how gallery systems and art practices might be transformed by Indigenous knowledges, aesthetics, and land use. It's a practice of stewardship and decolonization that centers Indigenous knowledges and creative land practices. So currently, I'm turning my research creation practice to my new role as the director of the School of the Arts at McMaster University. And I want to think of academic leadership as a conjunctive practice that takes seriously radical relationality. What does it mean to direct as a research creation practice guided by feltness? How can we, the faculty, students, and the Hamilton arts community, collectively, conjunctively challenge systemic institutional racism, ableism, and colonialism? And how might we do that as a research creation practice as a department? Thank you.